What's up guys, Ted from Immersion here, and I'm back with another DM's Guild Spotlight review for you here. This time I have something a little bit different, kind of different in what I guess I would call it a new mechanic module rather than like an adventure or a new race. It's really hard to just quantify it and make it make sense. So let's take a look at Here's to Crime, a guide to capers and heists. So here we are on the DM's Guild. As you can see here, it is $2 to pick it up. So I will not be going through it piece by piece entirely because I don't want to ruin it for you guys and negate that you go purchase it. It was provided to me for free, so this review copy, but my opinions are my own. It is a best platinum seller here, so that means it's pretty damn good and has done very well here on the DM's Guild. 4.5 stars on 17 ratings, which that doesn't sound like a ton of ratings for a platinum seller, but you got to realize not a ton of people go in and actually write the ratings or write reviews. So the fact that it's got 17 is pretty good. So let's take a look. Your guide to running Ocean's 11's style capers and heists in 5th edition D&D. We all love caper films, but it's hard to capture that kind of mystique in Dungeons & Dragons. So capture the energy and mood of our favorite heist movies with the special rules supplement, which is strongly informed by the new classic RPG Blades in the Dark by John Harper and Evil Hat Productions. The guidebook hacks the Blades in the Dark approach for 5e, reaching a middle ground between John Harper's heavily narrative focus and the mechanical robustness of 5e. Seriously, go buy Blades in the Dark, it's so good. A planning phase to keep the characters focus on first planning just enough of the caper, let the players influence the narrative, still leaving room for surprises. The caper phase lets the PCs overcome heist challenges, and the score phase is the final phase where hopefully you do everything you need to do and you make it out with what you can in for. Put the heist into Dragon Heist. Note, although conceived as an add-on for Dragon Heist, this rule set has a cinematic feel that is especially well suited for fast-paced heist adventures in the Eberron setting. I'll go so far as to say you can incorporate this into any adventure, not just Waterdeep Dragon Heist or Eberron, but it does seem to fit very well. The examples given are very heavily themed around Waterdeep Dragon Heist. So let's take a look at the module itself. So here's our introduction, and it kind of does a pretty good job here explaining it. And what I think my first read through would probably be one of the hardest parts for very crunchy, rules-focused DMs is to just lay back and, to take a step back and let your players have fun with it. Because this is written in such a way as if to be a heist movie, right? There are challenges that actors and characters in heist movies and in shows overcome, but usually they make it out with what they went in for. They have a couple hiccups along the way, which are fun, but this is heavily narrative driven. So, and I kind of like this, and I do want to try to find a way to incorporate this into my own campaign. How, I'm not entirely sure, but it lets them, rather than focusing heavily on die rolls for everything, there are die rolls, don't get me wrong, but it allows them to describe what they want to do, and then it happens, basically. So, if we take a look, phase 1 is the plan. And the hardest part for me looking at this was like, how do you tell them? But you basically need to get them into a scenario where they're going to try to do a caper of some kind. That's how this works. If you're not in that scenario, then this module really doesn't have anything for you. So then you let the players choose what type of caper. A hit job, a con job, a heist, or working the mark. And this is, as described here in this table, accomplishing the goal with violence is a hit job. A con is lies and deceptions. Heist is stealth. And working the mark is social manipulation. Again, mark being the victim in whatever the scenario is. And I will read through, there's some pretty good blurbs kind of showcasing it in world, how it would work. So, basically, you see here, in addition to affecting a roll made in Phase 2, this decision lets you as the DM know how to break up and how to include combat versus social interaction and that kind of thing. So, once they've decided on a style of caper, you're going to guide them through answering following caper-specific questions, and then it has a list here of, you want to keep things vague, right? You don't want to go crazy, but I'll go through, so for an example, for a hit job, Keep things loose. We're hitting him at his house. We're attacking when our convoy is moving. You're not getting into the fine details of who is getting hit where. You just want to know what the players are expecting. We're attacking in the alley, not while the wizard and the rogue will be on the roof and the fighter will be behind the trash can. We want to keep this fast-paced. This is a heist, or caper rather, so a degree of expediency and tension around everything helps to put things in perspective and kind of immerse players in what's going on, right? So con job, we want her to think I'm long-lost uncle. I'm going to pose as their bodyguard. Heist, we're hitting the wizard's tower while everyone is distracted, or we're entering through the sewers. And work the mark, we're going to seduce, get the information we want. We're going to blackmail them into opening the safe. So, then you have preparing the caper. So let's take a look here at planning skill check. Ben, Brian, Lehman, and Mike are planning a heist. They're going to sneak into a noble's estate to get the safe on the top floor. Ben, I want to figure out what's the best way in. Can you draw up a map? And I think this was pretty integral for me to get this part. DM, well, that's figuring out the best way in. I want your character to do that. How is Solrati the rogue going to figure out the best way in? And Ben says, I guess she's going to case the joint? Like, can she deliver a package to take a look in the front door? DM says, yeah, that's awesome. Roll insight to spot the best entrance while you're there, or deception to convince whoever at the door you're on the level, whichever you're best at. And that kind of goes on to show you some planning skill examples, maybe digging a tunnel is athletics, deception, assume a false identity, performance, hired as a venue entertainer, sleight of hand, pickpocket the guard's keys day before, insight, research the mark. So, this portion of planning is a chance to let the players be creative, allow them to pretty much choose anything they want and prompt a skill roll. If a player's skill roll hits the target, they may contribute a +1 bonus to the approach roll in Phase 2, which we'll talk about, or gain a point of inspiration to spend on a flashback effect in Phase 2. Those are very cool, and I really like that concept. So we're going to talk about that in a little more in-depth here in just a second. Alright, flashback, or flash forward, change of outfit, different day. Anyway, moving on, we talked about flashback points. So the Phase 2 is the actual caper event itself. This has an approach roll, and I'm going to try and paraphrase these as best I can. But basically, it's how you're approaching the first part, the mark, or whatever the case may be. And it gives you some options here. Modifiers for hit job to strength, con job, wisdom, heist dexterity, work the mark, charisma. And this roll, I wanted to show you this table, as this basically plays into it in a bunch of different ways. So the party identifies a face, which makes sense. Every heist movie has its face character. If you're unfamiliar with the term face, it's detailed here, but it's also a common D&D term, typically in reference to the face of the party. In this case, this is the person who's kind of initiating or going through the face to the person of the mark, whatever it is, the person initiating everything. So you would choose who your face is in your party. And again, based on these modifiers here, you'd probably choose someone like if it's a hit job, probably your strong guy. If it's a heist job, maybe your rogue, and you kind of get the point. And there are these mark security ranks that you see down here. This comes into play throughout the rest of the adventure. Multiple times you'll have to associate yourself with this table and choose from there. So basically, to determine how well the first part goes, face rolls a d20 and then adds any skill bonus based on those stats. And then if you look down here, there's this security thing, right? So if it's got security rank of 1, your approach modifier is at -1. Skill DC to have a good roll is 10, and then examples are gullible, noble, a merchant storefront, and we can go all the way up to level 4, which is an approach modifier of -4 with a DC of 25. So to put that in perspective, to complete a heist with a security rank of 4, you're going to roll a d20. You're going to add your attribute bonus here, strength, wisdom, dexterity, or charisma, at least for the approach roll. And the DC is 25, so chances are you're not going to get it very easily, right? You have to roll there's ways you could do it, but basically you roll a natural 20, plus say your ability score is 5, that's 25, the DC is 25, but you're at a -4. Ways to do it, right? You could be a bard and have half your proficiency, You could have guidance, depending on how this all works out. So there's ways you can get around it, but I just want to point that out there. And examples for that are the Orcus's Tower, the contract room of hell, right? So very hard to get into, as opposed to a gullible noble and a merchant storefront. You get the point. And they even have like Xanathar listed here. Not a bad idea to list Xanathar, as this is a dragon heisty thing and he's involved. Alright, so the approach modifiers on the table assume a party of 4 to 5 players. For especially large parties, you may want to impose a larger negative number because more skill checks will be made during the planning phase. Also, for a grittier feel, increase all DCs by 5. So, I did want to, I guess I'll give you this too, because this talks about flashbacks, and then we'll kind of skim through the rest. But approach rolls, and there's an example of fumbling and how that comes into play. So, face makes an approach roll. Approach result of 1 to 5 is considered a fumble regardless. A huge complication has arisen. Before the caper can begin, now the players must deal with a problem outside of the method that they chose. For instance, if they chose Heist, something went wrong and they must have a combat encounter. If they chose Work the Mark, something went wrong and they must rely on deception. Fumble complication example. The PCs have decided to work the mark. They're going to meet with a Castellanter sibling at a dinner party and convince her to go double agent for them. On a normal engagement roll, we would just start the caper right at the party. But since they fumbled, they're having a hard time getting in. The party is a bit exclusive, or more exclusive than they thought. Now they've got to either sneak in through the back with Heist, forge some invitations as a con job, or fight their way in as a hit job. To give you so normally you roll into the Heist. This adds a little piece as a complication prior to the main event. On a roll of 16 to 14, a minor complication has arisen. Give the PCs a scenario in the caper where they are using their current chosen method, hit, con, Heist, work the mark. But because of whatever complication you've added, the first skill roll is made with disadvantage. On a 15 to 20, everything is going as expected. Explain what the challenge is, and allow the players to explain where their characters are in relation to it. And this is kind of where I was talking about, as the DM, you kind of have to take a hands-off approach in some way and just let the narrative go. The first skill roll will be made with advantage. On a 21 plus, that's considered a critical success. Tell the players what the first challenge was, and allow them to narrate how easily they passed it. So this gives them some leeway to have some fun with it. So then it gets into the actual running of the caper itself. Again, here it is. Should have a somewhat loose improvisational DM style. Again, that's what I mentioned earlier. Your goal should be to have 3 to 5 complications that stand between the team and what they're trying to accomplish. You'll want one complication that somehow ties into a skill roll they made while pre-planning. Let them bypass this complication entirely so they feel slick. An example, during the planning phase, a player used a persuade roll to make a friend inside. During the heist, look for an opportunity to have that friend get the team out of a jam. And that's good. It makes them feel like what they're doing made sense and it's beneficial. You'll want the majority of the rolls or complications to be tied to the method that they chose, with 1 or 2 from other ones. For example, if you chose hit job, that's roughly 3 fights, meaning the primary, 1 stealth and 1 deception. For a heist, 3 stealth encounters, 1 fight, and a social. This isn't an exact science, and you want to feel the pacing of the heist based on how it works in your game. But the main takeaway is that we want the planning session to heavily influence this narrative with a few surprises. And then here's some examples, right? For a hit job, there's civilians present. For a heist, another team is attempting to heist at the same time. Work the mark, an opposing faction has leverage on the mark. A con job, the mark has a especially savvy friend monitoring the situation. Just like the planning phase, the skill roll DC during the caper is determined by the security rank table. This one here. And now, flashbacks. I think I'm going to read you the flashback section, and then we'll just kind of read the chunks that are kind of how it works in action. So, when confronted with a skill check the player is nervous about, a point of inspiration can be spent to flash back to the day before, and the player may then narrate how their character prepared for this eventuality. Mechanically, the flashback allows the player to spend a point of inspiration that we talked about earlier, earned during Phase 1, to substitute a requested skill roll for one of their choosing. And here's a flashback in action. During the caper, Brian's character comes across a locked safe. His dexterity score is low, so he's concerned he won't make the roll. Brian spends a point of inspiration to trigger a flashback, and narrates a scene explaining how yesterday he took the safe designer out to dinner, and learned the combination. He may now open the safe using a persuade roll instead of a dexterity roll. So it's a really, really cool concept to allow people to explain how they are getting out of tough situations or ones that are not beneficial based on their character makeup or the way their class is designed, or the stats and skills and things they ended up with in the end of the game. And I really, really like this. But as a warning for DMs out there, a lot of this is dependent on your players. So just keep that in mind. You may, if your players aren't ones that are super overly creative and kind of just go from point A to point B and don't think outside of the box on this stuff, one, this will be a good challenge to get them to think about that kind of thing. But you may want to have some ideas possibly in your back pocket. If they're the strengthy type and this is a dexterity roll, some ideas for how, so you can keep things moving along. It's important to note that a flashback doesn't allow a player to change the fiction. If 3 guards burst into a room, we can't flash back to kill them in their sleep, for example. We've already established 3 guards are in the room. However, he could flash back and show how he had a distraction planned, allowing to him make a stealth roll instead of combat. The first few times players attempt this mechanic, be very loose with what you allow. Give the players time to get comfortable with it and let the plans be a bit over the top. A lot of fun of heist movies can be captured with this mechanic. No matter how ridiculous a level of foresight would be needed for this plan, say yes if it's something that can trigger a skill roll. There you go. So then there's your your core skill challenge of the main part of the caper, which is this is the score, right? So we're in the score phase. So I'll read you the piece here in play, and then we'll round this out. So Brian, Mike, Lehman, and Ben are trying to steal the Xanathar's goldfish. The DM has run them through several combat encounters and skill encounters, and they finally reach the Xanathar's office. DM, okay, you guys are in. I'm going to need a group skill check to pull off this heist. 5 successes before 3 failures. The DC would normally be 20, but you've overcome 3 obstacles, so now it's 17. How are you pulling this off? Lehman says, okay, check this out. Yesterday I went and bought a dozen goldfish that look just like his, and I've been carrying them this whole heist. Handle animal check, cool. The DM says, that's great. Looks like a shell game, roll for it. Lehman rolls a 19, so that's 1 success. Great, 4 more successes before 3 failures. Who's got something? Ben. I'm going to run through his entire lair screaming, holding a fake goldfish above my head to distract everybody. I'm really booking it. Athletics check. 21. Got it. Nice. Keep it moving. Mike. I'm going to pull some of the heat off Ben. I'm going to make an intimidation check to scare off some of the guards chasing him. I got a 12. Okay, that's 2 successes and a failure so far. I need 3 more successes before 2 failures, or it's all over for you. Brian. While everyone's pretty distracted chasing Ben's character, I'm going to make a stealth check and grab the real fish. 18. Awesome. Start pushing the narrative towards escaping. Well, we gotta help Ben first. He's still getting chased. I'm gonna make a performance roll and dramatically announce where the real goldfish is. 22. We need 1 more success. How are you getting out? Ben. In all the chaos, we're switching to disguises that we, of course, pre-packed. That's a 20 on my deception check. 5 successes, you're out. The 4 of you casually step out, goldfish under your arm as the chaos unfolds behind you. Dozens of guards running, looking around with dozens of goldfish. Xanathar looks to his empty fishbowl and lets out a yell of rage. Oh, there it is. So, just, wow, guys. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. And if it is, please tell me in the comments below. But I super love this concept. And, you know, certain things are hard to replicate in D&D. I'm not saying that it's not possible, as really pretty much anything is possible in Dungeons & Dragons. But certain concepts and aspects of popular culture or certain things, they just don't translate well to the base mechanics without thinking outside of the box of Dungeons & Dragons. So, you know, and it's usually fun things like this, right? Like a tournament where people get into, you know, a fighting tournament where they go and they just knock the shit out of each other. That sounds fun in theory, but you need to try to find a way to make things interesting, because if it's just a group of people at a table and it's one-on-one fights, where it's one person fighting an NPC or a player fighting a player, those people are engaged, the rest of the table is not. So maybe you add cool, you know, aspects to the terrain or something to just make things more interesting, right? Or I just recently did a horse race thing, and rather than just making a bunch of handle animal checks, there was a whole series of different mechanics that the players could use to do different checks. Whether are they going to try to stop to avoid this thing, they're going to try to jump over it, it's different checks. There's a lot of cool different mechanics people could do. So it was a pretty cool concept. Different things like skill checks for different games, darts or fishing or pool, that kind of stuff, I feel is very much make or break based on the mechanics, and they don't work great in my mind if you use, or in my opinion, I guess, if you use just a base game. It's cool if you come up with something to kind of tweak it to make it more interesting, to sort of make a mini game within the game. And that's why I really like this Here's to Crime, A Guide to Capers and Heists, because it is sort of a mechanic within a mechanic, still using base D&D, but its own little mini game. And it could, just from reading it the way I've read it to you guys, I think you could do a decent job of replicating a heist movie type scenario, and it's make or break based on the players, right? How they go about this. It also gives them a chance to exercise their creativity, and you a chance to kind of take a back seat and let them have the fun, and you just kind of mediate where you need to. But I super love this. I think it's an awesome product. I'm curious what you guys think. If you want to pick it up, there'll be a link in the description below. You can go get a copy for yourself. And I'll see you guys for the next DM's Guild Spotlight.